What is the creepiest thing you found in a forest? A dead man. My fire department was called out for a search for a missing person. He was supposed to report back to prison on a work release on Wednesday. We were dispatched on Saturday after he was reported as a no-show when someone found his car on a back road. We assumed he had parked there, then called someone to pick him up. Okay, a couple hours wandering the woods, then we don't find anything and go home. 35 minutes in, we find him. He's maybe 50 yards off the gas pipeline easement, just standing there facing away. You'd think he was taking a leak until you see the rope. He had hanged himself in the worst way. The tree he'd attached the rope to wasn't strong enough, so he didn't break his neck. His feet were on the ground. He strangled himself. It probably took a while. He stood there, dead, for 3 days. We held his body as our captain climbed the tree and cut the rope. We wrapped him in a tarp and carried him nearly a mile through the woods, back to his car. We sat there for 2 hours while the forensics team surveyed the site and the car. I was a volunteer firefighter for 17 years. That guy is the one that still appears in my dreams 14 years later as I walk up the gas line trail. I see him standing there. My friends and I used to hike and camp up by French River in northern Ontario. For anyone unfamiliar with this area, it is extremely remote. You have to leave your car, canoe a few hours, then carry your canoe to your campsite. On this occasion, we were camping for 10 days. There were 4 of us, and we didn't see another person or any signs of anyone else near us. On day 3, we decided to wake up early and hike along the river going north. One of my friends was really good with maps and planning hikes for us, and he said that this one is about a 9-hour hike, there and back to our campsite. We started our hike at 6 a.m. and around noon stopped to swim for a bit in the river to cool off, followed by some lunch that we packed and a beer or 2 each. We started packing up again and noticed a small cabin off in the distance about 25 meters downstream. We knew we would come back this same direction, and we put our garage in a bag with our beer cans and hoisted it up over a tree. This is a common thing to do while camping, as it keeps wildlife such as bears away from getting into your garbage. We knew we would be back this same way in a few hours to collect our garbage to bring back to our main campsite. For the remainder of the hike, I couldn't help but feel like someone was watching us. But there were not other signs of people around us. When we reached the end point, nearly exhausted but also satisfied with how far we had come, we debated stopping again for a rest before making the 6-hour walk back to our main campsite. As we discussed, I mentioned that I kind of just want to get back to our campsite because I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. 2 of my 3 friends then also admitted they had a similar feeling, so we decided to head back. As we approached the area where we rested and swam earlier, we came across our garbage bag. It had been removed from the tree and emptied. The weird thing was that it wasn't ripped or torn as you might expect from an animal. Instead, it was untied and neatly emptied and left wide open on the ground. We remembered the old cabin downstream, but there was no sign of it this time. As we walked a little further, we saw something on top of a rock. It was our beer cans. We consumed 2 each, so there were 8 empty beer cans. Only they weren't just scattered on the rock as you might expect from an animal. They were neatly piled in a pyramid-type shape. As we got closer, we realized to the cans, we noticed a Polaroid photo tucked under the bottom one. It was a photo of the 4 of us, swimming. Completely freaked out at this point, we half ran and half walked back to our campsite. We arrived at dusk and decided that this night would be the last night of our originally planned 10-day camping trip. None of us slept a wink that night. We stayed up by the fire, terrified and hoping for morning to come. By sunrise, we packed up and hiked out with our canoes. We were so happy to see our vehicles where we left it and drove home together in silence. We live in rural East Texas, in what is considered to be the Bigfoot capital of Texas. My family has lived on our property for over 100 years now. In the late fall of 2020, we began having what most would consider odd activity on our property. Now, to preface, our property is mostly woods and swamp and butts up against more properties that are even less visited that are also forest and swamp. Some of the neighboring properties only have people visit for a few days each year in deer season and are otherwise vacant of humans all year. And some of the waterways get into pretty dark and isolated stretches of river bottoms. In the evenings around sunset and into the earlier hours of the night, we began to hear on occasion odd bird-like whistling noises coming from the woods across the road in the forest and swamp area. Our homes are on the other side of the road from the undeveloped property, and these weird noises would come from in the woodline near and after nightfall sometimes. It sounded like birds whistling and chirping, except it didn't sound exactly like birds. It sounded like something doing a really good job of mimicking birds whistling and chirping. This went on for months, but sadly, I never got any audio recordings of anything. My father, an experienced hunter and woodsman, said he kept trying to locate the source of the noises, but when he would get closer to the woods, the sounds would move away from him, further into the woods. He said it would continue to do so almost as if whatever was making the noises was trying to lure him into the woods. Having seen too many movies, he opted out of that situation and went into the house. This all climaxed in January 2021 when I went out to our vehicle to get something from out of the back of the vehicle, and suddenly from not far into the wood line, I heard the most chilling noise I have ever heard in my life. As I was retrieving my bag, a loud animal-type roar erupted from the wood line near the gate that accesses our property, which is located just opposite the road as my driveway. I have spent my entire life studying and working with animals, namely, exotics. And the best I can compare the sound to was a large male silverback gorilla roaring. I want you to understand that this sound was sound primal and alarming that I actually mildly pissed myself reflexively. I searched for days on YouTube, and the closest sound I found was a video of a male gorilla at a zoo suddenly roaring to intimidate some onlookers. And it gets weirder from here still. Not being one to simply assume my family is being haunted by some monster, I decided to grab my headlamp, sidearm, and AK-47 rifle and head down into the woods to see what was making these sounds. I wish I could say that I saw a huge Sasquatch and had some epic shootout, but I didn't. I sat in my vehicle in the woods in total darkness for some time. I even played the Sierra sounds over my vehicle's speakers to see if anything would show up, but sadly, and perhaps thankfully, nothing did. However, before leaving the woods, I headed back up to our cabin to make sure everything was normal around the cabin. We have actually had people break in before, so I wanted to make sure everything was as it should be. I searched the immediate area with my headlamp and rifle, and while there was some large animal that stayed just out of my line of sight due to thick undergrowth, I am mostly certain it was a feral pig, which can get very large and dangerous. The oddest pet of all this is that when I checked the slough, a semi-permanent body of standing water near our cabin, there was an animal in the tree I still cannot identify. This small animal was about 2 feet tall, sitting on its haunches, and about a foot wide. It had no obvious or visible tail and appeared to clearly have 4 appendages. It was invisibly some sort of mammal, but since the water was higher than normal due to a wet winter, I couldn't get a better angle or get close to it without wading out into icy water. This animal had silver-colored fur with texture rather similar looking to that of a chinchilla. And for all my attempts, it would never show its face or paws, as it kept all those distinguishing features tucked into its body like it was sleeping, despite it clearly reacting to the sounds I made on the ground. I have tried for everything I can think to identify this creature. It was not a opossum, it was not a raccoon, it was not an owl or young owl with downy feathers. I cannot place this animal with any local species of fauna, even if it had some health issue like mange. The closest thing I have been able to find is a silvery gibbon, which are obviously not native to eastern Texas. My wife still half jokes that I found a baby Sasquatch tucked away in a tree by its parent, and I honestly don't know what to think about all of this. But after that night, we haven't had any more strange activity that I am aware of. I am a very open-minded yet rational person. I have grown up in these woods. I have studied and kept numerous animal species. I have helped with government ecological projects in our area. I have taught biology and ecology classes. But this will baffle me for the rest of my life. Did I find a baby Sasquatch? Sorry this turned into a bit more of a written piece than I expected it to become, but this is one of those stories that my husband and I still trot out occasionally to this day. It wasn't exactly in the woods, but it was, as best as we could tell, on uninhabited land that was surrounded by forest on all sides, so woods adjacent, at the very least. Most of my family for the longest time was centrally located in Florida, going back generations. That's changed as people have gotten older, passed on, and of course needed to move out due to the job market in the state stagnating. But back then, I was sort of the black sheep of the family for being one of the very first to get out. I still tried to make trips down there to see them, though, when time and money allowed for it, since I was still in early 20s, something trying to keep my head above water, financially. Anyway, for this particular trip, I decided to introduce my then boyfriend, now husband, to everyone. And on top of for once having company on an extended road trip, it was also time for us to try out our shiny, newfangled GPS to get us to where we were going, since it had been long enough since my last journey that I didn't really trust my memory to lead me through Florida's roads. At least, not until I was in my home city proper. Turned out to be an almost entertainingly terrible trip. We were hit by fog and rain at the state border, to the point where visibility was nearly zero. And for one of the few times that I'd seen in years in that state, we got hit by hail in big enough pieces that it eventually broke one of my car's wipers. After debating whether we wanted to chance stopping to try to find a place to pick up a replacement and essentially having to navigate this terrible weather with an increasingly shaky GPS device, we were at the least inhabited stretch of the main road, and the instruction set that device drew from definitely reflected it. In the middle of the night, we decided to keep on trucking, and I made do with what visibility I could. Besides, I figured being able to read the road signs wouldn't matter so much since we had our computerized road map giving us instructions. Well, that's what I thought. Except at some point, that calm, mechanical voice instructed us to take an unexpected turn off the main road, and after a little bit of back and forth with my SO, we half-jokingly decide to go with the flow and take it, figuring we could easily make a U-turn if it was completely off the mark. For all we knew, it was operating with information about some kind of road obstruction or accident that we couldn't see yet, because the weather was still absolute crap. So we drive along for a good amount of distance, and pretty much within the first couple miles, every other bit of traffic has dropped off. Then, a few minutes and another turn later, the road makes an abrupt transition from concrete to gravel, and I shrug my shoulders and chalk it up to at least a somewhat entertaining dogleg in our trip, even if I still couldn't see any of the landscape in this soupy weather. I tell my SO to just keep his eyes peeled for a good place to turn around, since our 2-lane road has turned into an unpaved, 1-lane path with a ditch running up each side, surrounded by increasingly heavy trees. One bit of silvery lining, though, is that the horrible spew falling from the sky at this point finally pauses, giving us a bit of relief and making me not so afraid of getting our car stuck in mud while making my eventual turnaround. That also means we get an unobstructed view as the woods break on one side of us, revealing what looks like an old farmhouse sticking out like a sore thumb, and hoo boy. We both fell absolutely silent when we saw this thing. It looked very abandoned, which is itself not unexpected. Florida backcountry, as I was familiar with, tended to be flat as a pancake, with fields and sporadic wooded sections. And every once in a while you'd get some abandoned building, usually from someone who owned more land than they could maintain or just couldn't afford anymore. This fit the bill with its empty, broken windows and peeling whitewash boards, although it had a surprisingly well-maintained clear space around it, with evenly cut grass in a stretch about as big as a decent-sized yard. and festooned around that clear space, sometimes sitting up on pieces of raggedy furniture or set up in little dioramas on the saggy porch of the building, are dolls. Literally hundreds of varyingly shaped dolls. Sometimes marionette types with worn-down joints or stuffed Cabbage Patch style. One human-sized mannequin set on a rocking chair so that it stared at you not 5 feet from the road. Which was especially disorienting because the fog hadn't cleared fully, so you just saw this head and shoulders emerging from the mush before you could see it wasn't actually a person. And I'm not ashamed to say I veered over as sharply as I could on that narrow path because it fooled me for a handful of seconds. We're both rubbernecking like crazy as we pass this thing because the more you look, the more you see all the attention to detail someone went into to set everything up. Some of the dolls are sitting at tiny, doll-sized tables, having tea with one another with cracked and dirty glasses. Some of them have clothes, but no hair. Some have hair, but are slumped on the ground like they'd been forgotten, while others are very purposefully placed. I can't even imagine how much effort had been sunk into that little, abandoned house, but only on its doll residents. We passed that place by without a single word said, waited until it had finally veered out of our sight, and then I turned us around regardless of how narrow the path still was. We had come to the silent consensus that our little side trip was now done. When we went by that place again, I was going about as quickly as I judged our janky lemon of a car could go, but I'm sure Hubs got another good eyeful the second time around. Nowadays, we still occasionally reference the dollhouse when talking about trips to Florida, and then one of us will air guitar a riff from the dueling banjos of Deliverance. But it's definitely one of those things you only find entertaining from several states away, and not with a dead-eyed mannequin staring seemingly directly at your car as you drive past. Happened a few years ago when me and my buddies went into the woods at around 9 p.m. To get to the woods, you have to cross an old road that leads to Waterworks Factory. This road separates the housing estate and the woods. Well, we were crossing this road and decided to enter through a different place we'd never been to before, and we were only halfway down the road when something whistled at us. You maybe think it's probably just your mates or something like that, but this was different. We knew it was coming from the bushes almost instantly and legged it back towards the houses. Naturally, my fight or flight impulses kicked in, and I ran, but in the complete opposite direction to my buddies, they ran back the way they came. For some stupid reason, I ran straight towards the place the whistle came from, realized I was going the wrong way, screamed, saw a silhouette of a man in the bush, and nearly fell over trying to turn around. We all regrouped and made the ultimate collective decision to go back in. Nothing. No person, no second whistle, no speakers or anything. The silhouette I saw was gone. So we went into the trees and found an opening, like a little circle of ground in amongst the trees. We found a little teddy bear, as if it was deliberately placed and positioned where it was. Sitting on top of 2 twigs made to look like a cross, and 4 other sticks holding the bear in place. We took a picture, left, and never came back. I have since lost contact with my buddies due to me starting college and them entering their final year of high school. But I tried going there through day just last week, but all the paths have been blocked, fallen trees due to recent red warning winds in the UK, Storm Arwen ruined a beautiful forest, and buried a mystery we never got to solve. TLDR. My friends and I were whistled at by something in the woods, and we ran, went back, and found a small teddy bear, as if it was in a ritual.